time, and that is continuing. Yeah, I mean, we're living in a very exciting time, and lots of opportunities. And one of the bigger dangers, other than physical danger, is the opportunity of missing out on things. Because while you may be looking this way, your bigger opportunities are in that direction, and you could just, miss them, and they could be easier mountains to climb. So this is some of the things I wanted to touch on today, but I'll let you lead as far as where you want to talk about.
Okay, great. Guys, I will be glad if you present yourself in the chat, and maybe you will have some questions. We also will talk about them. And today we have like two big directions. One of them, how investment field in space looks like from investors' position. Where money is, what worth to invest in, where find potential unicorns in such a difficult field like space?
Okay, yeah, so that's actually an excellent question, because that touches to the heart of what people's understanding of the space industry is. Most people, when they think of space, they automatically think of three things: NASA, going to the moon, rockets, and SpaceX, which is also rockets and Mars. So those are the three things people's minds encapsulate. But space is a lot bigger industry. The fact that our phones, satellites, GPS, all of that comes from the space industry. So one of the hacks actually for the space industry is to be in the software business, because software is a denominator industry, it touches everything, and it touches space too. So we're actually heavily focused on the software side, where there's iterative improvements for satellite transmission, satellite control. So companies that work on that are small ninja-like teams. They don't need the big warehouses, because if you think of the traditional companies, you think of companies that have warehouses, rockets blowing up, lots of money. As an investor, that's the last thing you want, is to keep writing checks to the same company. You want to write checks to different companies. So that's where the space current ecosphere is. It's called look down, Earth observation. There's lots and lots of money in that arena. But that doesn't get news coverage. So when people think about an industry, they want to know the cool and sexy. They don't want to know the dull and dirty. So the dull and the dirty would be the software, and we're having problems with this software, and we could improve on the software, or a small piece, something. They want to focus on, when are we getting to Mars? When is our colony on the moon? When are we resource mining? Well, those are things that are coming down the line, but they are further away. And if you invest from an investor's perspective, if you invest in those companies early on, the problem with that is that you cannot ride the valley of death. The valley of death is many of these companies will not be able to survive until we get to the moon. So if you're building rovers, we're not even fully established and don't even have a colony on the moon yet. So if you're building rovers, you may be cool and sexy for the next 18 months, but then they're going to come back to you for another check, then another check, then another check, until it turns 2030, and then they'll be able to do something. So this is the challenge. And the same challenge applies if you're a startup looking to build an amazing new rocket or a lunar rover. Same problem, because you're going to have to keep going back to your investors because there's no revenue streams coming in. So in space, you really have to, first of all, in the space industry, you wake up every day and ask yourself, I ask myself, do I not like myself? Why am I in the space industry? Because it's very, very hard. So if you're in the space industry, there's a part of you that believes in humanity's interplanetary settlement. That's the only crazy reason to be in there, because, and of course returns, but those come later, because there are easier ways to make money on Earth. So, this is the bigger challenge in the space sector, and most people miss it. They automatically associate with the big things, while the big money is in the little things.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point of view about like this personal decision why move in this field and why you go from blockchain, cryptocurrency, and all your financial background to space field.
Yeah. So this is what it is. The space industry is like a yesterday's amazing supermodel, right? So like, it's like, no, people are like, oh, maybe she'll have a comeback or he'll have a comeback. So we're suffering through some of this things. And the space industry, the old space industry, was brought upon because of military concerns. It was a safety and security concern. Now we need more people who think outside the box. I myself is more an expert on economics and fundamentals of an economy. So while people who build rockets can build rockets, people who build software can build software, but the space economics, we need more people in that sector. So that's the contribution that I make. I don't build rockets. I'm not a rocket scientist per se, but I work on different things. And in time, the space sector will require more and more of these different expertise coming into the field.
It's a great motivation, truly, to say not a lot of venture capitalists look into future for so long time further. So if we talk about celestial ventures, how it works, with whom you work, with what markets, with what founders, what your like dream partner from founders and from investors?
Yeah, I mean, the underlying current is that the space sector is growing and growing significantly, which basically means we see far more deal flow than we can ever take on. Now, doesn't mean that every deal is an amazing deal and you need to put money, especially because we have some very strict criteria. You can tell me the sexiest rocket company that just came out and is going to blow Starship out of the water. Chances are we won't invest in it. So, the deal flow is pretty strong. And the business in this space sector, people know who we are, right? So we see the deal flow, but not everything we would invest in. And the big question that you must always ask in the space industry, unlike blockchain or software or any other industry, is that can they survive the value of death? Because no matter how good they are, if they can't survive that time period, and you're making these amazing investments, just think of the people who invested in SpaceX. Today, they're rockets, they're superstars, right? Like I meet them often and they're like, we invested in SpaceX early. Yes, but that meant you invested in 2002 or 2003. So you had to survive 20 years without seeing anything, and they still probably cannot get off until it goes IPO or they sell it on some private equity rise or something, their share. So the thing is, now you're in for 20 years. I want to know who's willing to wait till 2043 if you invest now for their return on capital. It's kind of rough, and you should always be diversified as an investor to know that there's other opportunities in other business models that are far closer. So you don't want to put this much capital to the future. You want to have a weighted ratio and balance, something most people in the investment field fully understand.
So it looks like for founders and for investors, it's a long journey, and they need to have not only like a venture plan, but also a plan how to live through this part of time when we haven't access to moon or another planets. So it looks like we need have this bridge of usage technology on Earth. And do you have some recipe or some examples that work in the best way for this usage of technologies?
Yeah, so if you're a startup thinking of coming into the space industry, the first step you must take, there's a very important first step. And that step is to go find yourself a nice psychologist and sit down and figure out if you're crazy. That's the first step. And then if he certifies that you're not crazy, then you go and build yourself a game plan, and then you start the process. Because after you do everything, and even after you get your first funding, because you get funding just means you have more responsibility. So, people say, well, we got funded, that's like a lottery ticket. That's not the exit. That's the point of anchoring, which means now you're tied down. Up till that point, you can just do whatever you want. But now you're tied down to a set of criteria. It's more like an anchor on your feet. So, to get to that point, that's when you realize, once you get your funding, that I'm crazy. I've taken on, say, $2 million, and I've projected that this is going to happen, and it's dependent on factors that I don't control. This is the biggest problem in space, because there's so many factors that are outside of control. I can't tell you how many startups we see that are focused on delivering products to space based off of Starship's capacities. So great, I'm sure that Starship will do amazing, but see how that has shifted to another outside factor. So if Starship suffers a delay for whatever reason, your entire business model says, okay, guys, we have to add 3 years of delays that had nothing to do with us. So this is why space is a multi-dynamic environment that requires you to be a little bit of crazy in you to do. But luckily, we're not a startup in space. I look at these companies and I'm like, I would not want to be in their shoes, because it is tough. But I don't want to make it sound terrible. This is a growing field. And being in blockchain in all these years, I realized when you look at blockchain, 12 years ago, people were like, well, talking among each other, it was like, when do you think this thing will take off? When do you think this will become amazing? And we were like, maybe 20 years. And then all of a sudden, in 2017, because of a new innovation, ICOs, it came closer. And then it spawned so many companies. So space is suffering that same thing. So when I look at space, I'm like, I've seen this movie before where things seem far away, and then all of a sudden they come really close, and then you have to be prepared. So this is the challenge and the opportunity simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. If choose what usage it could be, truly to say, 2 years ago, I didn't think that I will meet someone from space stage in Ukraine. And also I didn't think that I will understand how to work with military and defense stuff, but now in Ukraine, we have all this situation. If you talk about this specific field, connection, space stage, military defense stage, and government, how you see the situation? Is it possible now to have some in the same moment a startup with interesting technology, some usage in different fields, also defense, and to have opportunity to raise funds not only in your country?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So space actually has some unique characteristics. The biggest user or the also investor in the space sector is government, and government has a military component. Space was born out of the military needs. NASA is an entity that literally reports to the Pentagon. So you get an idea that it's anybody who's in the space sector has to have some sort of an understanding of what's going on the government side, because that's a very important contributor. Especially if you're in hardware, you're going to need not just government support, but you're going to need government contracts in order to survive that valley of death. And the VC space is quite small. You can literally count the active investors in space as far as funds go. Now there's 7. They used to be 5 just a couple of years ago. So there aren't that many to begin with. And the government angle and the military angle, it's important because what goes up can come down aggressively. So, if you're building a rocket and, you have a great rocket, but it can also come down aggressively to the populace below. So you have to manage that. And that cannot be done without you having at least an understanding of where the government is going. Because if we're going to the moon through Artemis, if that effort slows down, everything else slows down along with it. And as we know, some of these big European Space Agency, NASA, DLR, JAXA, all of these are dependent upon the politics of their nation. So the funding can be large or small depending on the mood of the nation. So it's kind of, you're putting in outsized factors. So again, the theme here is that there's so many elements in space that you don't necessarily control. Things will get easier when there's money to be made in space. I want to touch upon another industry that I think everybody should be, they're probably aware of it, but not on a deeper level. So I want to move away from space, but the last point I want to touch on in space is that these different components in space that are going on at the moment are opportunity, but also the same set are risks. So you have to chart your course very, very carefully. Otherwise, you are locked into a bunch of investments that won't come to fruition for an extended period of time, or worse, they'll come back to you for more money because as an investment operation, you want to make sure you're putting a lot of seeds, right? You do spray and pray to a certain extent, and you want to be able to do a lot of it rather than keep going after the same one. So this is a big challenge. I did want to touch on something that's exploding right now. It's an underlying industry, just like .com was. And it's just been birthed November 22nd, which is ChatGPT and generative AI. That is something I think everybody should be aware of as far as trends, not just for 2023, but they are the trends that will impact every business model. So for those who've not engaged in ChatGPT, bear with me, the ones who have, the ChatGPT can actually, you just give it a few commands and it can write entire essays, and it can write a research paper all by itself. It writes it swift. Try it out for yourself. So this generative AI is an explosive field that's going to affect every field. So whether it's blockchain, whether it's space, whether it's, no matter which industry you're in, we now have artificial intelligence that can support your efforts in a way that you've never been supported with it before.
Yes, it's like a great move forward for, I think, all sectors, and we will return to this topic a little bit later. But if we will finish about working with government, I know that you are in contact with different countries, and maybe you can navigate how you see now most open and most supporting ecosystem for startups in space.
The countries that are really vibing in space at the moment are France, UK, obviously the US. These are the bigger standouts. Japan and Germany are involved, but some of the, we see deal flow from in order. US, France and UK are pretty much tied. I would like to say France more than UK, but they're pretty much tied. After that would be a tie between, Canada would be next, and then individual countries collectively someplace in the EU. So these are some of the major countries that have most robust ecospheres for space. And of course, even Israel, because Israel has a very proactive approach to high tech in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So we now know where to move.
Well, Tatiana, we're living in a world where you don't actually have to move. You can just like do what you need to do. It's a decentralized world. I was actually looking to get an office space in Portugal, right? And because a lot of people I know who are like moving here and there. So I'm like, let me get an office space. And it was very affordable. A very nice space in a very nice location in northern Portugal, lots of universities. The rate for the office was fantastic, and I was ready to sign. And then I asked a lot of the people who are local over there, guys, I'm going to get an office space. You can work from here. And they're like, can we just work from home? Nobody nobody wanted to show up to the office. So then I'm like, who's going to report to this office? Why am I going to get this office if nobody wants to actually work from the office? So this is another challenge we're dealing with, and an opportunity, because you can have team members everywhere.
Yes, and we feel it by ourselves now. A lot of companies, when they moved because of war, see this diversification of people through all Europe. And in general, you have IT instruments, and you have internet, and you can manage everything in the same quality as it was in personal. But you lost something about personal connection with people, and you know, this team vibe and so on. It's not so easy to manage. But if we return to a space field and look on it from investors' eyes, so let's imagine that I manage amount of investors' money from family offices who interested in long term to invest in a space. How I can choose a proper portfolio of companies?
Okay, so there's 3 sectors. This is what we focus on as well. We created 3 sectors that need to be the focus. There is the look down element. So look down element is everything. I'll give you a test case for it. It's think of ArcGIS. So ArcGIS maps the Earth, at least in the US. I'm not exactly sure, so I don't want to speak about other nations. But in the US, ArcGIS basically maps properties. So if you're an owner of a property, you know your boundaries, and that's done by satellite. Now, every couple of years, the mapping is done again and again because technology and software is improving. So when they do that, it gives you a better understanding of where your boundaries are. Now, that may be nice, but what's even more essential is where is mining happening? Who has the mining rights in a particular location on Earth? So say in Canada, there's lots of resource mining. So you want to understand the different elements of where your mine is and what rights you have, you particularly have. So that information is very key, and that all comes from space. So Earth, that's called Earth look down. So Earth look down is very, very important. There's lots of money in it right now. So your portfolio has to be weighted towards companies that do Earth look down, as well as satellite software. That's going to be easier. The next circle out would be what's happening in LEO with satellite improvements. There's like incremental improvements on satellite infrastructure, small pieces that need to be changed out, better outlets for electrical charges and whatnot. So that would be the next circle out. And you want to have lesser of your investments in that because it's further out as far as, you know, all the risks go higher. And then the larger ones are like, okay, moon play, lunar rovers, resource mining, all of those come in. Forget about asteroid mining. Most people think, okay, we're going to way too hard. There's a reason why on the moon there's craters. Why are there craters on the moon? Because we've had asteroids hit the moon. So on the moon is the best place to do resource mining because all you need is rovers to go over there and pick them up rather than trying to secure your moving asteroid. Space station, same problem. It's a big build out. It's like building a 40-story office building in space. It's not going to be easy. Leave it to the experts at companies like Blue Origin. So, you know, this is some of the challenges that we're facing in this sector. So if you're weighted to what's near Earth and then a mid-level and then the outsized level, then you can build on a portfolio.
Mm-hmm. And for example, I invested in these few companies different, and maybe I will add something from agri-tech and something like that. My strategy as investor, the best of it could be just give money and don't touch founders, or I need to be with them in a contact, work more like venture studio or maybe even took a big part of work in company. How you see it?
Yeah. So I think your question is, do you have a hands-off approach, or is it better to have a hands-on approach, right? So I think I'll speak from my own experience, is that like, if you have a hands-off approach, then it's fine. However, not knowing enough about any sector is an issue of core competency. Like Warren Buffett says, that expand out from your core competencies, right? So being, if you're an investor in space and you don't have a lot of knowledge about it and expertise, then the challenge is you'll make substandard choices to begin with. So you're going to choose a set of companies that may not serve in optimization. So that cascades into its own set of problems. So for people like ourselves, we have a hands-on approach with the companies. We keep track of them. We connect them to whatever they need. If they need contracts, if they need industry connection, or if they need government connection, because if we're just going to do that wholesale spray and pray model and stay hands off, then why are we even here, right? Like, we need to go away. So we have a very hands-on approach. We guide these companies, and we want to make sure. Now, we do hands-off approaches, but those are very solid companies that are not in pre-seed and seed. They've already moved to Series A, so then they don't need that level of support. But the smaller companies, you live or die based on either contracts or other military, not government contract, or non-government contract, industry contract. So you basically need to have that support for these companies. So hands-on is the best approach.
Mm-hmm. And if we talk about market, who you see like big players in this market besides NASA and the government guys?
Well, the bigger players are obviously the ones that we all know: SpaceX, Virgin Orbit, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, Orbital Reef, or Blue Origin Orbital Reef is one operation. So, or at least Blue Origin is a big component of that operation. The traditional Space 1.0 players, whether it's Lockheed Martin and some of the other guys, they are also in it. So those are bigger operations. As an investor, you're going to be tied to the back end of that equation. So you're not going to necessarily, be able to get in on the seed or pre-seed round, right? So these are bigger operations. The best course of action, not just for a startup or an investor, is to be in the ancillary activities. So the big company does what it needs. So like Orbital Reef, when they build out their space station, they automatically need a lot of different services that go along. Those are going to be served by smaller companies, because these bigger operations can only do one big thing, and then they outsource some of these other components. Think of it like an automobile manufacturer. Your car, when you get your car, like in the US, if we buy a car, the engine is made in Australia by another company. The doors are made somewhere else. The bumpers are made somewhere else. So it's put together by all of these vendors that come in, and there's a big market for those vendors, and that's where the focus should be. The big players are self-funded and on autopilot.
Mm-hmm. Does it a good idea to go in a deeper collaboration with them on, for example, seed stage, or it's like only a risk to be acquired by them?
In the startups, for the startups? Yeah, I think there's across the board, we focus on pre-seed and seed because we bring a level of expertise that enhances them. We like to think we're the steroid shot, right? To this person that shows up at the gym, we're the steroid. So we're going to make you bigger and better and train you better. So we are focused on that. The more if it depends on your appetite and what your directive is for your investment portfolio. Because if you're more along the lines of, look, I don't know this sector, so you want to come in later. If you come in later, it's already somebody's done that heavy lifting and all that hard work. Now you're coming in on Series A and bigger opportunities. We pretty much shy away from those because we cannot actively contribute too much to a company that's already A and beyond. So we focus on the pre-seed seed rounds because we can support them, grow them, network them, connect them to contracts, and be able to grow them to grow the right way and to survive the value of death.
Sounds great. Let's move to a future a little bit. How do you see a big holdings? We know now SpaceX and so on. They was born from another companies typically, yeah. So it's like interesting added part for some real business. How you see organizational typical space corporation in future where it will be a market?
Are you saying that what will the space economy look like, or are you referring to space
and
economy?
How players of this economy will look like?
Okay, so we're waiting for a very special moment in space, which will probably come sooner or later. Every industry, humans get an inclination, this feeling we get that, oh, this industry is going to become big, this sector is going to become big. So you have the early adopters or people who want to focus in on it. And then you all wait for the eureka moment, the gold moment. So I use this example when I speak about space in different parts of the world, is that America in the beginning was settled on the East Coast. And we finally got California, and the government was like, guys, everybody move to California. You know, it's great. There's lots of open land. And people were like, I live comfortably in New York, DC, Virginia. I'm not going over there, risking my family. You know, there's hostile natives who will kill us. So we don't want to go 3,000 miles. Until 1849, when there was gold discovered in California at Sutter's Mill, all of a sudden you couldn't stop them. Everybody wanted to be in California, and the government didn't have to push anybody. People were going all on their own accord. So space, by the way, blockchain had that moment with the ICOs. So once ICOs happened, boom, everybody wanted to be in Bitcoin. Bitcoin went from 800 to 20,000. So the same thing will happen in space, and in space, it could be a few factors. One of the bigger ones will probably be some resource, a rare earth mineral, or a resource that we can mine from space, and that'll flood the economy with so much capital and attention that people will then want to jump in. So the space economy will look less like satellite, but more like tourism. I'm not a big believer in. Yes, tourism will be something, but you're a default tourist if you wind up working at a space station, right? if you're already there, you're now a tourist by default. So when you're resource mining, that's when the big money comes in. Now notice, this is the important takeaway, probably why the early adopters in space are there, is the US is, if you take away the inflation component, like right now all the numbers are ridiculous, but let's say the US a few years back was a $15 trillion economy. So if we call it like 20 trillion right now, there are resources on other, on the moon, on Mars. Mars is far away, but let's just focus on the moon. There are resources that can equate to trillions of dollars. So that is competing, companies would be competing with the likes of the GDPs of nations, and US being one of the largest, so it'll be bigger than many nations. So with that type of capital infusion, the birthing of a space economics dynamic will be large and very, very important to Earth dynamics and Earth economy.
It's a great direction of thinking, and if we talk about economy, we sure need to talk about government and all technologies that match government. Maybe you have some picture how will a future of government looks like.
Yeah, well, see, look, that's an excellent lead-in, because the thing is, if you have companies that are operating with such large capital and they're not tied, look at the companies on Earth. You say, I'll use an example that may or may not apply, but General Motors, Tesla, Ford, they're tied down to the laws, economics, and opportunities that are dependent upon Earth dynamics. They can't escape them. But if you have a company that's outside of Earth, either domicile, the company is incorporated on a space station or the moon, it is not so dependent upon Earth regulations. So it'll become independent operations, and it'll be harder for governments on Earth to control them. They will control them in the beginning, just like when the New World was founded, Spain, the Dutch, and the British had a lot of control in the New World, but eventually the New World became its own nation states. So these are some of the things where there will be that control in the beginning, but it will lead away. And an important takeaway here is a lot of people rebuttal that and say, well, no, they won't be able to because they need Earth. Who's going to buy all of these resources? Well, if you're projecting out like 50 years out, then what happens is that if you have a space station and you have somebody on the moon, a colony on the moon and a space station, and they're conducting commerce with each other, or two space stations conducting commerce, that's independent of Earth dynamics. So they really don't care at that point what Earth or Earth governments think about their operations. So that is the breaking of the umbilical cord and the birthing of a space economy that's independent of Earth.
Mm-hmm. So it will be another level of all this cryptocurrency blockchain stuff, move away our borders of countries and government. So in space, we will have the next step of this evolution, more open and another style of economy, and maybe opportunity to create something another imagination about how relationship between people, between businesses could be built. And if we talk about players who go into space, we talked about startups, we talked about investors. What real businesses, or what type of businesses that already exist, already have some cash flow and feel themselves pretty good, could be interested to go to in space field now, to be a first adopters when space will be open?
Yeah, so humanity's tendency is to reach out from where it is to a certain extension. So this is why when the mainframe computers we had in the 70s, and then somebody said, we need a personal computer, people started saying, that's the stupidest idea. Why would we need a personal computer? That is dumb. We have mainframes, we don't need personal computers. So because we were extending out from a mainframe, which we use for very limited functionalities, to a PC, which we couldn't imagine what would be the usage of that. Just the same way when the iPhone was birthed, we couldn't imagine that there was such a thing as social media. So it's hard for us to jump and see what it would look like. So for space economy, it will serve a similar function. Right now, the space sector is about rockets, about satellites, about possibly extending out to the moon. And one day we'll have a colony on the moon. Okay, well, what does that look like? What will be the factors? What will be their challenges? At Celestial, we're a big proponent of living inside the tunnels that you'll find on the moon and also down the line on Mars, because it's a little ludicrous to build your fragile little hut, if you will, on the surface when you're so much better protected by going inside the tunnels, and then you're building out other components of that space economy. So to go back to your question, once you have a thriving economy, you need a lot of other things. You need clothes. You need one of the things we focus on is aquaculture. So once we transport fish, that's a readily available source of food sustenance that would be available once we cordon off an area of, say, a lava tube on the moon, and then we are able to provide oxygen in there, close it off, and your sheltering is completely protected from any impacts from outside, radiations, the cold weather. You can heat it, you can control it. And once you're heating it, you have water and you have aquaculture, and fish is a good source of protein. So these type of things, as you can imagine, these examples brings out the need of many industries that are experts. Touching back on the Israeli tech, they are really big in artificial meats, right? So in time, they'll grow to the point where they'll be like, okay, well, we have a good industry, but the big need is in outer space, because you're not going to start transporting cows and raising them. You need pasture land. So you need synthetic meats in order for you to grow the human presence on other terrestrialities or in space. So many industries, the bigger takeaway is right now, whatever company or industry you're working in, eventually will have a space pivot. Like, okay, let's see if we can provide this for the space sector, because if the space sector becomes this $1 trillion industry, there'll be a lot of money for companies that focus on delivering to that industry.
It's a great takeaway, what to think about for people who not in the space field right now, but maybe we should try it. Also, guys, if you have questions, I will be ready to read it from a chat. But I have also another question to you. How do you see like next generation of research, and does it matter how research funded now to move these space startups forward?
Well, research is dependent upon the sector. Space is we still use the blanket term space, but space is no longer a single sector. It's divvied up into many things. So do we have satellite research? Yes, but not too big. Launch is our biggest concern because of the gravity well of Earth is so profound that we need a lot of research dollars going there, and there will be research dollars. Once we are focused more on having space stations, you have the ability to put people there. And then that's where the research will go. How can we sustain longer? What would aquaculture look like in space? What would some of the plants that survive in space look like? There's research that's currently been done on the regolith, the soil of Moon, to be used to grow plants. And it actually works. So now you want to possibly either tweak the plant or tweak the soil in order to give you greater crop yield. So that's a lot of research on elements that have nothing to do with launch anymore. So there's a lot more research dollars going to go to those other elements of human sustainability in space, rather than what we traditionally think right now, launch, satellites, etc.
If you talk about longevity and also all the stuff that connected to healthcare, what you see a biggest effect from questions that space ask us to this direction, like health stage and opportunity for longevity? Maybe you see some cases, some questions that could improve life for people on Earth before we go to space.
Well, before or after, here's the thing. The only way you can get an understanding of where you live right now, let's say you live in a house and you've always lived in that house and you've never went outside the house. Only when you go outside the house do you realize, oh, wait, my windows are old. I may need to change my windows, or my walls have been weathered and I need to maybe apply something to it. So until we are just inside the house, we cannot see from a broader perspective. So once we get out, we can not only do better for ourselves, but all of this technology comes back to help Earth. Now, let's use a quick test case. The regolith and the crop yield example I used earlier, either we improve the crop or we improve the regolith. Let's say we wind up improving the regolith. That same research and technology, we can look at our soil on Earth and say, okay, if we do an infusion of this or that, our crop yield goes up and we can benefit with more food for the planet and enhance food security. So the space has always been a contributor to Earth dynamics, and that will only explode greater. Right now, I'm doing this on a laptop. A laptop is an invention of the space industry because they needed smaller computers. So everything we use on Earth, even today, if I want to go to a nice restaurant of my choice, I need GPS. Uber operates, Uber, Lyft, all of these companies operate on GPS. So we are dependent upon the space industry's tech, space tech, and the daily functioning even now. So just imagine when we are even more of us, bright minds, are out there in space, then we can continue to build on that. Earth will be the biggest recipient of the benefits coming from space tech as space tech grows.
Sounds like a great future, I think.
Yeah. We just got to get through some of the human conditionings on Earth, which stop us. I mean, you know, realistically, on Earth, there are no borders, you know. This is one planet. If more of us see that from outside, one of the tragedies that happens when we are children is we go to school and we look at a globe. The teacher shows us a globe, and it has all these lines that this country is here, this country is here. But when you look at space from above, there are no lines. So the whole planet belongs to all of us. So then when enough of us go out there, they will come back and say, guys, come on, you need to think better. Think of it this way. When people from the old world came to the new world, and then those cousins went back to the old world and said, guys, what's with all this fighting you guys are doing? Like, relax, you know, come on, you know, learn to work together. And all of a sudden, things start changing out because there's a new perspective in town that was missing, the perspective of being not in the house, but outside the house.
So it's definitely will be about borders. What it's also will be about borders, about economic, about governments. What another 3 points? What it will be about?
Well, it'll be about. It's always been about not. It's always been not about space. It's always about about humanity, and how humanity will proceed into the future, where we leave the past elements of strife, you know, resource mismanagement, resource allocations, and distributions. Some of those components have been affecting us. And once we have a dynamic outside the Earth, we will treat our planet better. Heavy industry, we will take off planet, and we can treat Earth better with some of the resources that we're so aggressively taking out. And, you know, those are challenges that we live with, and we don't see a breakthrough. We can't see a breakthrough because we're all stuck in this one house. So we're all rubbing up against each other. And then there's a challenge. Another thing with humanity, and this is also another point, is that humans like to explore new concepts and new forms of government. So we've had capitalism. We even in the US, we don't live in full capitalism. That would be disgusting. We have a capitalist socialist concept. In other countries, they've tried different experiments. So what happens when you have one country that has a capitalistic endeavor and another one that has another one, and then they rub up against each other? It creates conflict. But in space, if you have 300 people on a space station, and they're like, we're going to build a new decentralized direct democracy concept, and you have an authoritative government right next door, or in another space station, it's like, fine, guys, take your 300 people and go. You know, go 2,000 miles away from us and have a nice life. You know, this is the problem, that on Earth, we're all stuck together. So we're constantly like, no, we have to do it this way, that way. So these are some of the bigger things that you take away the minute you are no longer confined to one place.
I like this stuff. Take your guys and go out. Yeah.
Have a nice life. You know, try it, and if it works, let us know. We'll re-examine it for ourselves at that point.
Hey guys, find another planet. Sounds good. Okay, we have a question. What about materials? Do you invest in new materials for space, new 3D printing technologies?
Yeah, so materials is the realm of research for governments because they have the capital allocation to facilitate that. Now, the nice answer would be like, yes, of course we do. The answer is no, because it's going to require a lot of capital infusion to keep iteratively testing those materials until the tolerances have been achieved in order to effectuate the change in the current paradigm that you have. So if you have a better material for rocketry or satellite, it's going to require iterative improvements, and it's going to require a lot of research capital. So that's being done right now for thrust, for materials, but it's all government efforts. I don't think it would be the realm of capital, investment capital, to jump into that. 3D printing has its own set of challenges. Iterative layering is nice. However, it requires, again, tolerances to make those potential products that you make effective for what you're doing. So if you make a 3D printed plastic component, it still has to have the yield in order to last in whatever application you're using, especially in space, because the pressure points in space are harder. So if you can build it on Earth and you can take it, it becomes easier. Down the road, 3D printing has a potential because we cannot heavy lift everything from Earth, and then it becomes in situ resources, right? ISRO is big, so in situ resources will be a thing once we're no longer on space stations, once we're on the moon. Then you have regolith, and you need new ways to use that regolith, and perhaps you'll use 3D printing to build your houses. But then again, the best course of action is to be inside the lava tube. So your housing maybe inside the lava tube may have 3D applications. So yes, there is elements, but the tolerances levels for 3D printed items are still not wholesale there. We've been trying this for now more than a decade to utilize 3D printing for some of these capacities, and they haven't materialized. It's still cheaper to manufacture them in a mold rather than layered through 3D printing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and if we're talking about investment in this direction, you recommended to go where?
When you go solo, you go, what's that saying? When you go solo, you go a little bit, but if you want to go further, you have to go with a team. So it's best if any operation, especially from the investment side, is looking into space tech investment, that it's best to align yourself with a particular company that is already deep into the field. Like, like Celestial's been in there for a long period of time. So there's a set of understandings. You have two choices. Build yourself set of understandings over minimum 5 years in order to grow yourself to the point where you can choose one out of the 20 companies, or you just work with another operation that allows you to fast track and then be able to grow in that manner. Space, unlike any other industries, has many moving parts. And if you miss even one or two of those moving parts and your startup is fantastic, you're still going to be at the net problem of the value of death, because there's all these outsized factors, and they all have to be mitigated into the risk quotient that you're calculating for your investment. Sorry for nerding out over there, but it's important. I know it's important for the investor, because the investor will catch that and understand exactly the problem that's being addressed.
Great. We together almost hour, and I have a question about your interest. If someone wants to help Celestial Ventures succeed in what you are doing this year or maybe next year, how it can looks like from different perspectives, even if some president of some country watch us today.
Yeah, I mean, if they're looking to engage with us, it's easy. On our website, we have contact information, contact@celestial.ventures, and they can engage in a variety of different ways. But beyond that, I mean, space industry itself is a big future. We're not in here just for the hell of it, because like any other industry, you have a lot of opportunity nowadays. You have the opportunity to go into so many sectors and make your money, but space is going to be one of the biggest, because look at it this way, Tatiana. You have the likes of Google. You have all these bigger companies. They make amazing capital, amazing money. But what we're talking about in space is trillions. And the trillions equate to nation-sized operations that are independent of Earth dynamics over the long course. So space offers unique characteristics that grow into levels that you cannot get on Earth investments. So this is quite the important point if you think about and meditate on it for a little while and understand the ramifications to not just space, but to Earth itself. So it's going to be one hell of a ride once we actually have permanent settlement in space. Things will start changing rather quickly. Biggest thing will change is humanity's outlook of where they stand in the bigger scheme of things.
Sounds like a great opportunity, I think. We have a question how your portfolio looks like in percentage between space and other projects. I think it's a question maybe for you personally.
Yeah, so that's a very good question because it's never been clarified, I guess. So here's the clarification. The space investment is 100%. Blockchain is 100% because these are completely two separate operations, so there is no crossover. There's no crypto/space company that we deal with. If they are doing both, we will be the first company to run away. We don't want to invest in those companies because either you're in this silo or you're in this silo. Right now, there's no crossovers. So for GCC, which is our Global Crypto Council effort, we invest in companies in the crypto sector, 100%. Now within the crypto sector, there's DeFi, there's metaverses, there's play to earn, all of those. Our focus is more on the play to earn, the gamification component without being in the metaverse space. So that's where on the Global Crypto Council, so we're 100% in crypto. This Celestial Ventures invests exclusively in space sector, so that's 100% commitment to space.
Sounds good. I think last question that we have, when you have this second 100%, but it's more like a joke. Okay, sounds great, I think. Thank you for our today's meeting. It was pretty inspired, and I like this stuff when you think, can imagine a real situation, when you can think outside the box of our typical situation. If you have one thing to say to investors in space, what do you say?
It's a great place to be. The opportunities are endless, but simultaneously, just like the opportunities, the pitfalls can be great, and you can wind up in so many companies that are in the valley of death. So we took the requisite time period to be in the space industry for an extended period of time before starting to cut checks. So if you get into this sector, learn the sector, or join up with somebody who has expertise in here, and then go, because it's a multi-dimensional. This is the big takeaway for investors. Space is multi-dimensional sector. There are players who don't necessarily show up on the surface, so you can have a great startup that can die an even greater death based on some of these other components that you cannot control. So you have to move in a particular way. But then that goes to the exact ethos of investment, right? Which is the greater the reward, the greater the challenge. So navigating through this field in order to get to the companies that are best positioned for growth is what creates the greatest opportunity and you need to know all of that before you just jump in and build a basket of companies that you think will be the next SpaceX.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much for our today's meeting. It was pretty inspired, and I wish you unicorns as soon, space unicorns as soon as it's realistically can be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Be well. Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye bye.